Hey, and the gang is back. The world is all good again, and it's time to jump into the rotation.
You're a corner in my soul. You're a corner in my heart.
Now, I apologize for us not being together for the last couple of weeks, but the world has kind of gone to shit. Not that it wasn't doing that before, but it just seems to have been accelerating. I mean, we have 5 billionaires in a submersible that suddenly disappear into a crunch, and we have 500 immigrants that get killed in a boat, and we say we need to close our borders.
The number 5 is like a pattern here.
Exactly right.
It makes sense.
And we got indictments, but we have to wait at least 5 months now for a trial.
Holy
right?
shit.
Yeah, I know.
5 chipmunks sitting in a tree doing a dance 5 times 3.
And we're at this guy who's going to take down Putin, and he goes halfway and he says, "Nah, never mind. I got paid. I'm going home." Right? The dude's going to be a glowing head by the end of tonight, so we'll just deal with that. Let's get back to where we are. Hi, my name is Jerry Garcia. No, actually,
we all three have Jerry Garcia vibes. I mean, I'm sorry, Gary, but
I've got this new house that I just moved into over the last month and a half. And by the way, for those of you who aren't familiar with moving a 4-bedroom house by yourself, it's like putting your body into a blender and having somebody say, "All right, you put it back together again." It's exactly what I've been dealing with for the last couple of weeks, but we'll get into the capitalistic excess about that in a minute. I'm Gary Stein, your political director here for Suncoast Normal. Once again, to my right, your left, is our deputy director,
hi,
master of business
I'm
administration,
so happy you guys are back.
Carlos Armida, who is also now the owner of 2, not 1, but 2 Chillum stores here and in St. Pete, soon to open up.
So, St. Pete's actually opened up already. It's just like, soft opening. So it's not like as grand as this store, but it's getting there. It's going to be there soon.
And if you get down to Central Avenue and you see this giant thing saying shrooms and hemp, you found the place.
Fantastic.
And coming to us from above the Beltway, where he hits him below the Beltway, over to my right, your left, or one of those two, is our executive director and also member of the national board in DC for Normal, Christopher Cano. Now, our special guest for today is not here yet, who happens to be the state policies director for National Normal. So we're just going to have to deal with news coming from Chris.
It's Sunday and he's young. He probably had some fun in Miami last night. Maybe that's what's going on.
No,
I don't know.
I think he's still in DC.
He's in DC.
He is a South Florida boy, though.
Yeah.
Well, the museum did have a big solstice celebration last night until midnight. So maybe he was out that, with the rest of the astronomy buffs.
Oh, so he was out there dancing with the fairies.
Who knows? Who knows? It's the end of Pride Month. There's a lot of fun things going on. So, folks are out partying. I'd say this much. I just got back from a trip to Colorado. We had a national board meeting out that way as part of our, legal conference that they had in Denver. And I'll tell you, Colorado has changed much. I've been to Colorado 3 times since their adult use legalization. As a matter of fact, once in 2018, once in 2019, and then just this past month. And things are a lot different. Edibles are more dosed. It seems like there more consolidation among the cannabis businesses. There's less small businesses, if you will. A lot of multi-state operators, a lot of places that I've been to that have multiple locations. I mean, for some folks, like we just mentioned with Carlos, business is good. Folks are expanding, building new locations. For others, they're getting gobbled up. So that's the thing about cannabis markets right now, a decade later, if you will, is that some are businesses are thriving and others are being scooped up as the nature of capitalism.
So what you're saying is the invisible hand is slapping folks upside the head, basically, when it comes to the way that the cannabis business is going right now. We have the giants right now. Like, for instance, I'm not going to mention one particular dispensary, MMTC here in Florida, True Leaf, who is now dealing with closing down an entire state.
Well, part of that comes from True Booth, having its workforce unionize on them. When you don't treat your workers correctly, they will take action and do the right thing and form a labor union. Also, they had a wrongful death from someone who at their Olioke facility up there in Massachusetts. So between lawsuits, between a worker revolt, they're just not welcome in that state anymore.
Wow.
Well,
I heard that. So I've been hiring people for Learn Euphoria, the mushroom branded company that I'm doing, and I heard that there's been a number of layoffs in the state of Florida. As a matter of fact, one person that I hired, you guys will be happy to know, won the Cannabis Action Award for Best Bud Tender
ah,
of the year, and they actually ended up getting laid off from Sanctuary.
Wow.
So
Cold-blooded.
yeah,
That
so
was less than 3 weeks ago.
yeah,
is that why Sanctuary hasn't paid their invoice yet?
Well, we're not
I'm-
going to get into that.
I'm kidding.
but-
I'm sure the check is in the mail,
we're not going to get into that, but we've got
along with my
our,
pre-rolls that they promised me.
our finance director to take care of that. But yeah, apparently Sanctuary had to make some cutbacks. So I'm fortunate. I've got a hell of an employee coming on staff on Monday.
You got one of the best bud tenders in the Bay coming
Yeah,
on board.
award-winning staff.
Yes.
Award-winning staff.
Well, see, here's the deal. We're dealing with a huge problem right now in regards to deflation and inflation at the same time. And by deflation, I mean our money is being worth less and less and less. And that is why things are costing more and more and more. And that is an issue we really have to deal with. But that also means that if the prices of things are going up, I mean, my rent just nearly went up by about 40%, even with having to move out of the place that I was living in, because the landlord decided to sell the place because he wants to make 4 times what he paid for it for 10 years ago. The fact is, the workers' pay is not going up in congruence with the change in prices. So for everybody, when your income is the same but the prices go up, you afford less, you spend less. When you spend less, the economy suffers, and you have what is called price shrinkage, which is where we're having to deal with a lot right in the cannabis industry right now. Or you have, we used to, the biggest thing was like a 20% sale. Now it's a 40% sale, or a 45% sale, or a 60% sale, because they have to get rid of their cultivation. Otherwise they sell, stuff that's no better than what True Leaf sells. So no, that stuff is great. It's cured 60 weeks. It's fine.
Well, Gary, also you have to take into account where taxes play into all of this. One of the things that struck me in Colorado was if you spend $60 at a dispensary, you're going to wind up spending an additional $15 in taxes.
Wow.
So a $60 bill is $75.
Wow.
Oh, we got somebody coming on here.
I want to.
Okay. We do have some bit of news today, and with that, we have a special guest. Now,
Hi, Mike.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Now we have the #1 cannabis lawyer in the state of Florida on right now. Now, no disparaging to all the rest of the cannabis lawyers who don't advertise as much as Mike does, but one of the things we need in this industry is lawyers, not only in the legislature, especially the ones that are not fucking up, and lawyers in the courtroom as well, because we still have regulations that are still draconian in nature. And one of the things that we've been talking about for the longest time is employee protections. And Mike had a case just recently. Mike, would you go into the background of your case and where it stands right now?
Well, so interestingly enough, this case was a Department of Corrections worker who tested positive for the medical use of cannabis and was, sanctioned and terminated as a result. They told him that he would be able to go back to work if he, stopped using medical marijuana. He is a veteran, combat veteran with PTSD, had been on all the pharmaceuticals and didn't feel like that was the right choice for him. So he decided to challenge it under the law. And we believe, and will continue to pursue this, that our constitutional amendment, Article 10, Section 29, says that they're not required to accommodate, employers are not required to accommodate on-site use. So we believe, like how we have smoking in the state of Florida, that should be required to accommodate off-site use, as is how we got smoking in the state, where it states that, not required to permit public smoking. The court found that it was required to permit smoking in private. So, it's based on the same issue. We just got the opinion from the First District Court of Appeals in this case. And, I guess there's some good and bad things about it. I never really expected it to be a gun rights case, but that's what it ended up turning into, a guns right issue and not really an employee issue. And specifically, the court in the opinion, and the reason why it turned into a gun right issue is because at times, if there's riots or issues in the prison, the prison would then give, or our client would get a gun or a weapon in order to combat any sort of prison riot. So the court found that the prison having to give him a weapon would be a violation of federal law and therefore illegal, and therefore they would not have to comply with it.
Wow.
In a nutshell.
Wow, that's it's interesting. First off,
So,
a veteran, and I think our veterans can do practically any job they put their mind to, especially an intense job like being a corrections officer. Although I would admit, a corrections officer with untreated PTSD is not necessarily a good combination. However, a treated veteran with PTSD can handle anything, I believe.
well, and realize, so he was working, he got his medical card in like 2018. So, he had been working for approximately 3 years with absolutely no, performance evaluation issues or anything of that nature, before the random test. This wasn't a reasonable suspicion test. This was a random test. So, and the one thing that the court opinion did in favor of gun rights, and we have another case that should be going to trial in August, but the court did say they are not at all commenting or ruling on the issue of whether or not that constitutional provision provides protections for employees that do not necessarily have to handle a weapon or a gun. I do expect that I am going to work on getting a writ jurisdiction to the Florida Supreme Court. I think, that there's a couple additional arguments that we can make in addition to the ones we made in court regarding gun right issues in medical marijuana patients. Then obviously there's the case that Nikki Fried had started, which my understanding Florida Can is still pursuing regarding gun right issues as well. So I think there's a few arguments that the court didn't address that I would like the Supreme Court to maybe opine on.
All right, so the case is now going to the Supreme Court now that it was knocked down in the Court of Appeals.
So no, that was the District Court of Appeals. So
Yeah.
we're done the District Court of Appeals.
So it's all right. So, but it goes to the Supreme Court from here.
Yes, there's no other place for it to go except for the Florida Supreme Court, and the Florida Supreme Court is a jurisdictional issue. So the Florida Supreme Court would have to take jurisdiction of the case, much like they do in the Supreme Court.
I got you. First off, what brought on the reason for testing at that point in time? Was it
Again, this was a random.
It was just a random situation. It was not
Yep.
performance based or anything else that like, for instance, was he in a car accident or any of that, like that? Because that happened to my daughter where she was in a car accident. She was at a light, somebody T-boned her, and by policy she had to get
Yeah, so any workers' comp claim, because that's what that would usually fall under if while they're doing it during employment, would definitely require a test. But this was, again, a random. So there was absolutely no reasonable suspicion or any incident that occurred that caused the test. Same issue with the firefighter that we'll be going to trial on in August in Hillsborough County.
Okay, now is it possible that the reason they went after the guns issue as opposed to the other issue is the fact that if they were going for just his ability to use the product, wouldn't that fall under the ADA, where a person with a disabling condition should be allowed to have appropriate accommodations?
So yes and no, right? Now you say ADA, we get into the federal rights issue, but we would look at the Florida Civil Rights Act, which would provide those similar protections that the ADA does. And yes, and that is, the argument that we're making in one of the bases that we sued on in the Hillsborough County firefighter case was he does have a disability. And obviously Mr. Velez does as well with PTSD. And so, that disability not only includes the physical disability, but also those medications that they use to combat that disability, which should be protected under the ADA or, consistent state law.
All right. So how much help would it be if we had a bill that was filed that actually did offer employee protections, as we collaborated on a couple of years ago, and we've been pushing for the last couple of years?
Yeah. So honestly, with the ruling on this issue, I don't really know if the court would have ruled differently, because again, regardless of the state law, is basically what they stated, ironically, that the federal law prevents them from doing this. So, and I just say ironically because I recently, earlier this week, had the hemp case, Larry Friedrich from 2018, who was arrested for selling hemp flower. And the appeals court basically said, and I got the opinions the same week, said that federal law, has nothing to do with state law at the time, and state law still considered hemp illegal. So therefore, the federal law was irrelevant. So interesting, two different cases that I got that basically, to me, interpret federal law differently and its impact on Florida law diametrically opposed.
One of the ways that regulators continue to regulate is by creating a moving target, basically stating that if one thing has been regulated and they find that regulation to be unjust, they find something else to be regulated within the same jurisdiction to go ahead and go after instead. And that's what they've done about cannabis for years and years and years. It went from a cultivation issue without paying taxes to a RICO issue.
Yeah,
that kind of situation.
We absolutely need, and that's one of the federal arguments I'm going to make that you kind of just brought up, like why the feds can't come in and arrest these companies for drug trafficking, because of the budget amendments, right? The budget amendments say as long as the operators and people are compliant with state law regarding cannabis issues, then they can't be, prosecuted on a federal level. I think the same aspect or analysis should apply also to this case. But to your ultimate question, we absolutely need a bill here in the state of Florida which will protect patients' rights, because maybe not in this type of situation where we have a gun issue, but in situations like a firefighter or the teachers or anybody else who is employed that isn't in a kind of a highly technical, a special, type of position, absolutely should be able to use medical marijuana. And I will say in the firefighter case, that person is also an EMT. They sent a complaint to the Department of Health for his EMT license. The Department of Health found no probable cause to pursue against their EMT license because the fact that there was no reasonable suspicion and they had a medical marijuana card. So the Department of Health, in situations that I've dealt with has recognized the medical marijuana card as a basis to not, otherwise penalize someone who would be penalized, obviously, for testing positive. And that, again, was a random test. But we need a law here in the state of Florida to clarify that and to make employers, do what they do, because they'll always have that federal argument, and we have to prevent that from happening.
I guess one of the biggest questions I have is, what would have the greater impact, having a federal law of legalization or a state law?
Well, before you answer that, Mike, I'm really disillusioned because I honestly, this administration seems to be just doing whatever the hell they want. And yeah, if I could jump in, I know that I'm no lawyer, but it really seems like it doesn't matter. They're just paying attention to whatever suits them the best. So federal law would probably benefit the entire U.S. Huh?
Yeah, I mean, Gary,
And
federal
this
law
state, probably
would,
not.
yeah, federal law would end all the issues because those arguments that they have, and granted, we would still need state rights, because even if federal law turned around and legalized it, you know, I think we would still want state rights in those issues. If they turned around and all of a sudden changed a recommendation to a prescription, right, that would do it. And it's one of the arguments that we made and we continue to make is that technically under Florida law in our Drug-Free Workplace Policy Act, it states that a prescription or non-prescription drug is basically any drug that's prescribed or any drug that's readily available over the counter authorized by the state or federal government. And to me, that clearly includes, cannabis. We have the largest cannabis industry in the world in the state of Florida. So it's disheartening that and these are two different courts that we were dealing with in these situations. But it is very disheartening the inconsistencies and the fight that cannabis patients still have to go through, and it is cannabis bias. In the smaller counties, it's even worse. We're seeing it a lot now with the hemp issue, where law enforcement is going after people with hemp and not really caring about the COAs. And it's really all their just continued hatred of cannabis that we have to get over.
But let's go back to the gun issue because apparently that was what they got you on in this last ruling. July 1st, we have a new law in this state, thanks to our glorious governor who gets an A+ from the NRA. He's basically saying that you'll be able to have permitless carry in the state of Florida. Does that mean everybody except for people with cannabis?
Yep.
Medical laws?
Yes, it does, Gary. Yes, it does.
It seems like it to me, and I do think this also contradicts with the Vegas case, where the court said, it doesn't stop a person's right to possess guns, and then also the recent Eastern District of Oklahoma case, where really stated that, and it's interesting because it's a right-left issue, right? Just kind of like everything else I think that's going on in our state. They're saying freedom, and then preventing people to have any real rights. It's freedom unless it violates what their position on freedom is or what is right and what is wrong. So I think it's absolutely crazy the hypocrisy that's going on right now with all of these issues, and we need change and we need to continue to fight for it. And I think what's going to happen, interestingly, with a lot of these laws, as we know, most of them that have passed over the past couple of years that have been really, kind of controversial, have been challenged in courts, and a good portion of them have lost, or at least are losing. So, this may be more for show than substance.
Well, you've brushed your tail against the legislature more than once. How much money do they spend on legislation being challenged in the courts?
God, I know they spent millions just on the foregoing lawsuit to keep the system, but I couldn't even imagine at that point. I know during the foregrown case, we were kind of find out, like, do you guys even care that you're spending millions of taxpayer dollars on something that the taxpayers voted 71% on? And their answer is really no. Their job is to legislate, and what happens after it leaves their doors, I really don't think they look to whether or not there's going to be a lawsuit at all.
And Gary, let's give our listeners some background information on why this is happening, right? Right as we stand right now, a majority of states in this country and the District of Columbia authorize state license production and sale of cannabis to qualifying medical patients. 23 states regulate possession and use of marijuana by adults. But The Controlled Substance Act of 1970, which still remains in effect, okay, establishes a unified legal framework in all 50 states for the regulation of certain substances that federal agencies say pose varying degrees of abuse potential. And for decades, the DEA has been designated as the agency responsible for implementing and enforcing the CSA, while the FDA is designated to determine substances medical efficacy. And since Congress put cannabis in Schedule 1, all right, that means that according to that, it meets three clear criteria. Cannabis has a high potential for abuse. It has no currently accepted medical use in the United States, and the substance lacks accepted safety use under medical supervision. We know for a fact all three of those things are absolute bold-faced lies when it comes to cannabis. And apparently, substances that don't meet those Schedule 1 criteria are in less restrictive federal classifications. Cocaine is Schedule 2, all the way through Schedule 5. So what you have right now is the need for the Biden administration, if they're going to do anything, to get a bill passed through Congress before the next election. Because alcohol and tobacco, which are two substances that possess far greater dangers to health than cannabis, have never been classified under the Controlled Substances Act. Over-the-counter cold medicines generally aren't either. Neither are dietary supplements. And we know the FDA is consistently having to recall dietary supplements for killing people. All right. And the crazy part about all of this is since 1972, the DEA has reviewed and ruled upon 4 separate petitions seeking to reschedule or deschedule cannabis. The last time was in 2016. And in every instance, the DEA has had the final say on the matter and has decided to keep it as a Schedule 1 drug. On one occasion, the DEA even overruled a decision from its own administrative law judge to keep it Schedule 1. And so right now there's this talk about, where rescheduling is going to happen and how it can happen. The fact is, and this is something that National Normal is highly in favor of, is rescheduling is not worth it. Some talk about rescheduling the plant because that'll provide investigators the opportunity to do clinical research. But other impediments still exist, like the U.S. Attorney General has to approve marijuana-specific research protocols, and that's statutory. That's not specific to the Controlled Substances Act. So, the only way to really fix this problem is to remove cannabis entirely from the Controlled Substances Act. And as Mike said, let the states' rights, the laboratories of democracy take hold. Let federalism, which has been the founding principle of this country, work. And that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, Chris, and that's why we, in almost all my criminal cannabis cases, I am always filing a motion to dismiss, challenging the constitutionality of cannabis as a Schedule 1 substance. We have another hearing coming up on that issue in July 12th in Marion County, so I don't really expect it to go far, but I've never gotten the issue to appeal, luckily, because we've either always won or resolved the medical cannabis cases in a beneficial aspect for us. So it's never been appealed. But the interesting, it's just such a crazy aspect. And as you know, the Biden, he called for the DEA and them to reschedule. We had the opinion of Clarence Thomas in one of the cases last year, who said that, this panoply of unbridled discretion and, a hodgepodge of different laws throughout the country isn't sustainable under a federal system. And in the Sioux Cicely case, which was the last one that tried to kind of challenge the scheduling on the federal level, the court in that case said, with the evidence that they presented, I think a properly presented petition to the DEA would require them to at a minimum reschedule it. But I agree, it should be descheduled. This is a plant. It's a health and wellness issue. Recreational use is there, but the bottom line is you can't use cannabis without medical benefits, whether or not you just want to use it to laugh and get silly or not. And it's something that the persecution of our citizens has gone on long enough with absolutely no benefit to our society.
Do you see state attorneys actually getting tired of having to prosecute these things? In lieu of all the rest of the docket they have to deal with?
Well, and especially right now, it's absolutely crazy. As you know, all DeSantis is calling for law enforcement throughout the country to come to Florida because we have shortages. But every state attorney's office that I work with throughout this state, and I work with a lot, I'm not, a type that is in one county. I go everywhere for cannabis cases, are all short staffed. And it just doesn't make sense. This is one thing that would at least cut probably 15% of their caseload.
Mm, mm, mm,
And let them get on to dealing with all the other guns rights cases.
Well, guns rights cases, but as we all know, violence in the state is dramatically up.
Yes, it is.
Mm.
That's basically what I'm talking about. I mean, everything from what we have to deal with Marjorie Stone Douglas and everything else, we see an escalation of mass shootings in this state alone, and almost every other state in the union right now. And yet we're saying now that from now on, as of July 1st, you can be, and this is a clinical term, batshit crazy and still get a gun, no problem. Victor Licata, who lived 2 blocks from here, killed his parents with an axe when his bipolar symptoms were not being quelled by proper use of cannabis because there was a shortage at the time. Could get a gun instead of an axe and kill more than just his family.
I will say I don't know if it's much different than our current CCW law, and I granted you have to go to a class and pay for it to get it. But and one of the officers during the class said it, like our CCW class is kind of a joke.
Oh yeah,
It's just saying.
I've
You
taken
know,
it.
uh,
You just sit through a 1 hour class, you listen to the people, you fill out a 10-question quiz, and then you go to the gun range and you shoot off 1 round, and then you send in your paperwork, and for $120 you get a permit.
right. And you don't even have to know how to load the gun or use the gun. They basically give it to you and say point and shoot.
Yep.
Hit the target or not, it doesn't matter. I was pretty shocked and amazed by that.
Yeah.
I think one thing they should probably cover more than anything else is not necessarily how to shoot, but when to shoot. I mean, Gandalf said it, the greatest bit of logic is to know when not to use the sword. Basically, and that is a situation with guns. People, they get off without any training of any knowledge of when it's not a good idea to pull the trigger when somebody's knocking at your door and the door is closed and you go ahead and shoot through the door.
Well, I don't know if our 18-month police academy is sufficient either.
No, it is not. It is not. It is not. The fact is that we have a policing problem in this country, and yet, like you said, Mike, you can go through a year and a half of training and think you know the law, but they don't. You, as a lawyer, go anywhere between 3 to 5 years of law school, and consistently have to take CLEs and other things to stay up with the latest developments in legislation and law. There is a serious gap in how police understand the law and how lawyers understand the law. And the fact is that many times people always say, "Oh, just comply, shut up, take care of it in court," but people don't even make it to court.
Yeah.
And that's where we have these issues,
Yeah, I would love to see either a college or military requirement component before people become law enforcement.
Psychological evals as well, before and even as officers. I mean, I recall when I was at the Air Force Academy, we had a guy who went a little cuckoo the day we were going to the gun range, and it was like, well, we're not going to the range right now. We need to handle this guy. That could have been a dangerous situation for a lot of people, and that's a major issue that we continue to have. And Gary, to your point around this concealed thing, one of the first things I noticed in the law was it's not valid if you have your gun in a place of nuisance, and that really triggered me in the sense of I understand through the color of the law what that really means. That just means that if you're in a neighborhood that might have drug issues, if you're somewhere where the people don't where they actually enforce loitering laws, if you will, that sort of thing, those don't necessarily apply. So for a lot of people of color, these having your weapon without a concealed weapons permit, I would say to those folks listening, still get your permits and cover your ass, because this law in itself, to be real with a lot of people, it feels like it only is going to apply to white folks.
And the thing about open carry is that oftentimes people use it as a substitute for something else. Basically, brandishing a gun to these guys is the same thing as waving a dildo in the air. It's basically trying to prove their manhood.
I mean, you don't have to walk down the street with an M16, but people do. It's what they, in certain states, it's their right. I mean, in Florida, you can open carry as long as you're going fishing or hunting. So, one of the things that I really do believe is in our constitutional rights. So I watch a lot of these audit the police videos that I see on social media, and I can see consistently police are failing to uphold our constitutional rights, whether it's our Second Amendment rights, whether it's our Fourth Amendment rights. But people get their civil rights violated all the time by people who are ignorant of the law.
Well, and I will say, and I'm working on, and I, emailed everyone in the normal legal committee, and I've been getting responses back throughout the whole state. You said the Fourth Amendment issue. I want all your listeners to know, right now the odor of cannabis in the state of Florida is still probable cause to search and seize. Just so everybody knows that, whether or not you have a medical card or not, whether or not it's hemp or not. There's been a couple rulings out of the second DCA, and I think the third or fourth, or not the third, the fourth. Maybe the second, and there's one other one, maybe the fifth, that have ruled that the hemp legalization is irrelevant and medical marijuana is irrelevant as well. Yep. Just so everyone knows. So that cannabis that you have should definitely be in the packaging at all times that you get from the dispensary, or else the dispensary police will arrest you. I mean, the cops.
So, Mike, it sounds like to me, should Smart and Safe Florida pass the ballot, right? Should it get through the Supreme Court test and folks get to vote on it, actually pass the 60%, then the legislature in its implementation bill needs to remove smell as probable cause, much in the same way they've done in Virginia, DC, and Maryland in their adult use bills.
Now, I would absolutely agree. If they still feel like it causes probable cause, we're going to still kind of challenge it in a few other circuits and try to, again, get it up to the Supremes to kind of say, because I just don't understand it and justify it. There's case law that says you could have a gun in the car and they could see it unless they know that you don't have it concealed. At that point, they couldn't believe that's probable cause to search. A hand-rolled cigarette or something looking like a hand-rolled cannabis or whatever wasn't sufficient for probable cause to search. So I just think it's wrong, an incorrect ruling. And it seems like there are a few states throughout the country that are still, but it seems like the majority of them have held that it's not probable cause. And then luckily some of those states have had the wherewithal to add it into the legislation, which honestly, this and expungements and sealings to made so much easier for cannabis patients or anybody, honestly, but and the employee issue are all things that I'll continue to push through advocacy in any future office I run for. So
I'm glad you mentioned that. Wisconsin Supreme Court just ruled in the opposite, and they kept smell as probable cause. So, we talk about elections. You brought out running for office. Elections matter. Who we elect matters on both sides of the aisle. There are prohibitionists in both parties. So we're not going to play favorites on Republicans and Democrats on this show like we get accused of. But the issue is that there's a strong slant to the right when it comes to prohibitionists, because not necessarily because of what values a certain party holds, but because of who the campaign donors are to a lot of parties. When you have people like BlackRock, Vanguard, G4S, Geo Group, these large private prison companies donating tons of money to the leadership of certain parties, then they make the rank and file fall in line, which is why we can't get a hearing for the past 3 years on our employment protection bill.
Now, one thing I would like to bring up, as long as we have you here today, Mike, for an extended period of time. Thank you very much, Jacob, for not showing up. We appreciate getting a chance to talk to Mike more. But the fact is, you are one of these people who has actually stood in front of the Supremes and tried to push for a adult use amendment to go through to the ballot. Unfortunately, unsuccessfully, because the court has been loaded with Kennedy and the other folks who are to the right side of conservative. And what do you see as the possibility for the current amendment, which currently has enough petitions to actually get through to the ballot if it does get past the Supreme Court? What are their chances of getting through this particular Supreme Court?
Well, I think this is going to be a very interesting, not only legal issue, but political issue. I understand, and we'd been talking to Trulie from the beginning, obviously, even before they filed the amendment. I think it's a really well written amendment, and obviously part of their issue, and I understand it, is basically the framework of that constitutional amendment has passed Supreme Court review twice, right? So the only additional issues that I think, or I see, is potentially, number one, did the ballot summary, or should the ballot summary have been required to state that it amends the medical marijuana amendment? I kind of feel like it should have. That should be an issue that it should have, awarded people of, that it amends and changes the medical marijuana amendment. Number two, the legislature, in one of the past bills that they did in order to prevent people to be able to get things on the ballot, they passed some additional language. I think that it has to comply with federal law. And they touched on it in the MILF petition. When the MILF got denied, Make It Legal Florida petition got denied by the Supremes. But they didn't really, I don't think, thoroughly address that issue. So I don't feel like the judges at that time, and I think there were, I don't think that it was all, not the panel was full at that time. I know when we did the oral argument for Regulate, which was about a month prior to MILF, we only had 5 judges. Because they were in the transition period before new ones were appointed. So I the MILF petition, I think the issue of whether or not it has to comply with federal law. So, whether or not the AG is going to argue because it's federally illegal, the state can't adopt it. To me, it seemed that the makeup of the court at that time felt that, well, we're a state, just like medical marijuana. If we want to pass something that's federally illegal, it doesn't matter. But those are really the 2 issues. Otherwise, again, because it is basically the framework of the medical marijuana amendment that passed twice through the Florida Supreme Court, that should be precedent to make it to have it pass again.
And let's be clear, the DeSantis administration does not give a shit about violating federal law or federal policies when it suits them.
Yes.
So for them to sit up there, Ashley Moody, to argue before a court, this violates federal law, they're cherry picking when they want to follow federal guidelines and federal laws and when they don't. Because, when we saw during the pandemic, they could give 2 shits about what federal mandates say.
Well, it was interesting in the parents' rights suit, the federal judge that just issued the injunction against the Drag Queen Act thing, ruled that, listen, there's a conflict. You have a parents' rights statute basically saying parents have the ultimate right to upbringing of their child, but then you're saying they can't make that decision to bring them to a drag show if they want, so they conflict. So I think it's pretty much consistent with, what's going on right now. But we need, state law to change and to protect everybody in this state, and hopefully legalization will happen. But again, I think that the black market will be subject to the dispensary police, because it's not a matter at that point when it's legal if it's dangerous or anything like that. I guess they have their argument that this stuff has fentanyl in it, as to, the black market is dangerous. But it's still going to have to be in the container, and it's still going to be controlled by them. Luckily, there'll be 50 of them hopefully at the time.
And hopefully we'll get this thing straightened out in regards to concentrates, because we're still dealing with the fact that although you can't smell a concentrate, you could still be considered committing a felony if you have it on you in your car.
So, and I want to clarify this, and all your listeners again out there, or anyone you guys know who is charged with a felony of under 20 grams of concentrate. We have to fight those cases throughout the state. There's an opinion out of the 4th District Court of Appeal that says that our definition of cannabis is any and all parts of the plant, including the extracts therefrom. So that any under 20 grams of concentrate should be charged as misdemeanor possession of cannabis and not as possession of felony possession of resin or possession of synthetic THC. Those are usually the two ways that we're seeing it charged. We currently have it on appeal in the 3rd District Court of Appeal, where the judge ruled in our favor based on that precedent, and the state attorney's office appealed, basically saying that the state should have the right to charge it because it's just the molecule, possession of THC, or possession of cannabis, but it's their choice. The big difference is possession of synthetic THC is a 15-year felony for over 1,000 grams. So, he had I think they used 12 Rice Krispie treats to meet that amount. So that's a very interesting issue. I've been trying to alert public defenders throughout the state about it. And any attorney that I talk to, and I go to different districts and find out about it. But it is something we have to fight because I think it's correct ruling and, consistent with the law. And it's horrible that exactly you can get half a gram of wax and it's a felony. It's ridiculous.
Well, Mike, here's the other thing is you can literally buy Delta 8 edibles and that's totally legal. But Delta 9 is you're looking at felonies. How that is ludicrous. It's Delta 8, Delta 9 are almost the same thing. They're just an acid difference, if you will.
Well, so one of the big things we're going to be challenging, I think, in a few of these cases where we've had people busted with hemp and stuff like that, is the testing that they're using. So I just found out all these roadside tests, even though law enforcement are saying, oh, this is a 1% test, meaning a test for 1% or more THC so that they can know it's hot. But in my analysis of the testing equipment, and I haven't been able to get it because you can only buy it if you're law enforcement. But in one of these cases, I'll be required to get it in discovery, and we'll have a couple labs that'll do a comparative analysis. But in looking at the documentation from the testing manufacturers as well, it does nothing of the sort. It only tests a comparison of a ratio of THC to CBD. And so if it has more THC in it than it does CBD, that test shows positive.
Wow.
There you go. Right? Exactly.
Roadside tests are not accurate at all or scientific.
Now, you should know that our good governor, when it came to the budget, he cut $51 million out of the budget for the Department of Agriculture. And I have no doubt that's going to go towards reducing the number of people out there doing testing and sampling and things of that sort. Because that's what happened in the Nikki Fried administration, and they had to go ahead and they had to cannibalize other programs just to get the product tested to make certain that we had safe products out on our shelves. And I see that as just a continuing situation. If they continue along the same paradigm in Tallahassee as they are right now, where they're looking again to regulate, but with unfunded mandates, it doesn't make any sense.
Well, Gary, we passed the largest budget in history in Florida, and yet all of our state agencies are still understaffed. I mean, if you saw the article recently, the 911 operators in Broward County can't even answer all the calls. So, I mean, we're at a spot where it's like, where is the money going? What is the DeSantis administration doing? How do you have the largest budget in history, and yet you have a shortage of state employees?
Well, we have plenty of people from Venezuela showing up in Sacramento and in Martha's Vineyard, which probably answers part of that question for you.
Oh, so just back to what we were talking about, they could waste $15 million on political stunts, but they can't hire people. Shocker.
I don't know if people want to be hired by the government at this point. I think that may be the other aspect of it. Even teachers don't want to work in Florida right now. We have a huge shortage of teachers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of too much regulation, banning, and everything else that the Third Reich, the Florida legislature is trying to and that doesn't make things any easier. I mean, I just moved from Pasco to Hernando County, so my wife had to contact the ACA to go ahead and switch out her Medicaid plan. We were on the phone for 4 hours and 30 minutes to get the plan changed. Now, let's say, for instance, she was working. There'd be no way you should have the ability to go ahead and change and be on the phone for 4.5 hours because they don't have people to answer the damn phones.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very, and we've had a surplus, and the state otherwise financially is doing great. It just doesn't make any sense, except exactly that, the fear of working. My sister is in the educational profession at the college level, and she was petrified as to like what she said or what she would say wrong. And I mean, at the college level, there should be no ability to censor what college classes are discussing under any circumstances. That freedom of thought and freedom of thinking and exploring ideas is fundamental of not only a human right but guaranteed a right of our United States Constitution under the First Amendment. And it just appalls me that you come out with a book that's called Free, and do the things that you're doing.
Well, Mike, it's a violation of our right to capitalism. Like, if you want to spend your hard-earned money or whatever on whatever classes you want, if you want to take classes in African American studies, you should be able to do that. If you want to take classes in gender studies in college, you should be able to do that. You pay your money, whatever classes you want. For them to sit there and say these degrees aren't valid or this isn't that's ludicrous in so many ways.
And money is speech. So if you want to spend $150 on a rose-colored blunt, you should be able to do it.
Hey, believe me, and listen, like Michael Franti says, to get the votes in Congress, you got to make it rain. And going through, and Chris, I'm sure you know this experience as well, it becomes a financial raise. It's not the person, it's not the issues, it's the candidate that comes up with the most money and, has the connections with the money, that because they know they're going to, follow their lead and do whatever they say. And as as you said, cannabis attorney, I fight for patients' rights, I fight for access, but none of the dispensaries supported me, allegedly because I support home cultivation. So and all I want to do is legalize cannabis. Make it free for everybody, not free, at least so people don't have to get arrested and persecuted. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah. And ironic, right? At the federal level, when you run for Congress, businesses cannot donate to your campaign. But here in Florida, businesses can write as many checks as they want to people's campaign within the campaign finance limits. And beyond that, then they can donate to PACs once they max out on their donations. So you're right, Mike. And it's crazy that in the state of Florida, to run for a job that pays $30K a year, you got to raise $1 million, and it's like that's crazy. It's no wonder why 75% of the guys in the legislature or gals or whoever are millionaires. And then you look at the other 25%, and they're barely making it. Trying to understand. They're hardworking people with full-time jobs. When we go back to looking at elections and money in politics, you want to go back to John F. Kennedy. He spent $25 million of his own family fortune, of the bootlegger money his dad made during Prohibition, to make sure he ran for president. You look at Eisenhower. He spent like half of his wealth to run for president. But then you look at the modern era, people like Joe Biden don't have to spend any of their money, or Hillary Clinton. They got campaign donors that can donate all this money. Trump stood apart in the fact that he did use a chunk of his own money to run for office. And that is the problem we have. You should not have to be a multimillionaire to participate in our political process.
Well, he is telling us now you can scam a ton of your base in order to get more money for your campaigns.
Hey, again, we live in a society where it's on the consumer. Let the buyer beware. And that applies to your cannabis and your politics.
Now, our current Supreme Court, as in federal Supreme Court, is now eventually kind of getting to it, letting us know exactly how much it costs to turn a Supreme Court justice in your direction.
It's about $250,000 is about it, right, Gary?
Yeah, so much.
A little bit more than that. And actually, some of these guys have really, you have to have that good $10,000 plane ride, which would be empty if they weren't there, that kind of thing.
I'm sure Joe Redner could set up an awesome weekend at Mons Venus for some of these guys, and we could get a couple of justices to swing our way. My concern is this. Pam Bondi argued against Amendment 2 and the court was split 4-3, and we had 3 liberal justices. Those 3 liberal justices are gone.
Yep.
So, Mike, how do you feel about the split on this court? I mean, granted, True Leave did everything they could, hiring Republican consultants, having Republicans draft the language, in order to fight off what they figured would be Republican challenges. But without those other liberal justices, do you think the court, with a 4-3 split on Amendment 2, is going to swing to any positive split, with Smart and Safe Florida?
And how much is it going to cost for us to pay off a state Supreme Court justice?
Gary, you're killing us with that. Come on, man. But
We
Mike,
need to get a governor and appoint one that maybe still in the game to play at this point. I think, Chris. I don't know, and I know they're confident in it, and I think that's why they did that, because they have the precedent to say that, that this amendment has already passed. But I think, there's no guarantees in it. Absolutely. I don't think it's not like smooth sailing for them at all, like it should be. I do think they have something to worry about. I do think that we're not just talking about cannabis here, right? And we know kind of why, or one of the reasons, that Hillary election, this cannabis issue for medical marijuana, it brings out the vote. And I think that, and I read an article, but DeSantis, I don't think wants this on the ballot either, because this will hopefully bring out the young, bring out the vote for cannabis, that typically tends to lean a little bit more left. We saw in the Hillary Trump election, there was more people voting yes on cannabis than there was for either candidate.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think it's not just a Supreme Court issue. It's not just a legal issue, but it again goes back to the political issue of whether or not this can happen. And we know DeSantis has previously said, in response to regulates amendment and legalization in general, that not on my watch. This is not going to happen on my watch.
And we don't have independent Supreme Attorney Generals here in the state of Florida. The last 2 Attorney General Floridas were in lockstep with whatever the governor wanted. They were basically the governor's lawyer as opposed to the people's lawyer, which is not the way it's supposed to be. But Pam Bondi followed Rick Scott every whim and wish.
Yep.
And like Ashley Moody's done the exact same thing for DeSantis.
So that means very clearly Mike Minority for Attorney General, right? What are we bullshitting about, Mike?
Oh, is Sean again?
We'll see what the seats are open in 24, but we need to make a change at the top.
I do want to go back to this issue, though, Gary. You bring up, and Mike brings up a very good point as well. If Smart and Safe Florida winds up on the 2024 ballot, the biggest loser in all of this will be the Florida Republican Party supermajority, because they have a supermajority right now. And one of the key things that even Spencer Roach mentioned was they want to have a constitutional convention. They want to rewrite Florida's constitution while they have a supermajority of both houses in the legislature. And if they lose that supermajority in 2024 and they don't get the constitutional convention by then in all actuality, we're going to, our political system will remain the status quo. I'm terrified of a rewrite to the Constitution, because what's to stop them from taking the medical system out of it?
100%. I agree with you, and I'm really curious as to what's going to go on with the district lawsuits. After out of one of the other states that the court just ruled that their districts were constitutionally drawn. I know that there's some already filed regarding Florida's lines. So I think that could potentially have an impact on, what's going to happen over the next couple of years for the election, because I don't really know if there would have been that supermajority if those lines weren't redrawn. Although, from what I'm seeing, the registered amount of Republican voters continues to raise here in the state of Florida. Pretty much for the past 20 years, it was, run by more Democrats than Republicans in the state as registered voters, and that's seemingly shifting.
Yeah. I mean, the Weatherford redistricting, obviously was reversed in a lot of aspects because of the fact that there was severe gerrymandering, and this one was even more gerrymandered than the last one was in the previous decade. So I see this as a very possible. We're going to get some redistricting when they finally get a chance to look very carefully at the way these districts were drawn, because they are insane, absolutely insane.
Well, Gary, I think that's a power we need to take away from our legislators. We need an independent, nonpartisan redistricting commission like they have in other states. But as long as the people who are getting elected get to pick who elects them, then we're going to continue to have these issues.
So we're coming up on the next session. Believe it or not, the last session just ended, and we haven't even gotten all the damn bills signed. In fact, the telehealth bill, for some odd reason, has not even been. It was ordered and rolled, but it was not. It has not yet been put into that folder to go to the governor's desk yet. I don't know what's holding it back. I don't know whether they're being told to hold it back, or they have their own concerns about the governor's vetoing it.
Yeah.
But right now, the legislature is holding that bill back, along with the hemp bill that everybody fought for too, just to make certain that kids don't have access to hemp, which has never been a problem here at Chilton. Because I've seen him take kids out of here who had fake IDs. He just throws them in the street, makes the chickens eat them.
Well, Gary, there was some issues also around the Pickford license. I know there was an amendment through the legislative session to try and grant all the applicants from the Pickford case a license. Where did that end up falling out through the legislative session? Was that struck down? Did that make it in the final version of the bills?
It was folded in as an amendment to the telehealth bill. And that is the bill that right now that's being held back. So it's not only holding back telehealth, it's also holding back all the Pickford licenses for being awarded, including the original one, which still has not been awarded yet because of the fact that the original applicant died, and they're still fighting that.
So we have 23 license holders. If the telehealth bill passes, is not vetoed by the governor, we'd have an additional 12 through the Pickford licenses. And then we have what?
I'm sorry, just 1 second. My understanding is that license will not actually give all of them licenses. That amendment, it will, from what I'm hearing politically, will probably end up giving 3 or 4 licenses through the Pickford, because of people not being able to cure the defects that they had in their applications.
A lot of them were just not qualified. That was, there's only 12 applications, but a lot of them just were not qualified in the first place. And these are things that can't be fixed because of it might force them to have more millions of dollars in the bank or any of the other things or number of years.
Yeah, my understanding is they couldn't necessarily change their application or bring any other additional people or anything like that on. They can just fix, but again, it hasn't been passed, so I don't think they know. But that's kind of the ideology of it. So I'm hearing 3 or 4 maybe, because I originally thought it was going to be 12 too, but I don't know.
And then
it's 12 of what are going to be delivered, not 12 additional ones.
Yeah,
12 ones that were originally supposed to be put out.
And then this next round, it was 20 or 25? How many have to be distributed?
22.
22. We have 74 applicants, right? So
that's correct.
Wow. So we may get 3 or 4 Pickfords, which would push up to 27 or 28, and then another 22. So that could push us upwards of 50 licenses here in Florida, which is a lot. But in a state with 23 million people, is it really, right?
Well, you got 1,000 licenses in Colorado.
Colorado has tons of places.
Well, and Colorado's horizontal, so I like to compare it to kind of Arizona because they have a vertically integrated system, even though they can wholesale to each other. But they have about 120 or so licenses for about 7 million people.
Wow. So
and a variety of products.
Yeah.
So we have triple their population. They have double the amount of licenses we may end up with.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And my other concern, of course, is whether or not the medical program will be cannibalized if we do get adult use. But that's a story for another time. That's what happens in Washington.
Well, and it'll be interesting when those licenses will get issued. So even though the one that won, right? So they did then award the license to the second applicant. My understanding, that applicant hasn't gotten their license yet either. And I don't know if it's because of the lawsuits. because then the question becomes, those 22 we were just talking about, guaranteed, as we've seen in Florida, everyone who's sued has pretty much ended up getting licenses one way or another, that those other 50 entities will end up suing who don't get licenses. So will they issue the 22 licenses, or will they then hold those for however many years after that fact until those lawsuits are complete, thereby continuing to give the current license holders that advantage to take advantage of the first, at least I would say, few years of Florida legalization without what I would see as a federal full legalization market. Because I would assume that any dispensary or any operator in the state of Florida who is looking at federal legalization does not want, federal legalization like alcohol that's shipping across state lines. They would want that state's rights issue so that you can't bring it across states' lines. So I think those things will be issued, but I don't see that coming federally, probably for 3 to 5 years. So that timeline, right? 2024, I think the licenses should be awarded by the end of this year, early next year, the additional 22. If they're in lawsuits for 3 years, that gives the current, 22 licenses another 3 years of legalization. If we pass it in 2024 to be the sole occupants on it and to continue their branding and expansion, really making it hard for those additional 22. So I'm really interested. I think those are two things that I see being problems. Good because we're opening up the market, but continue to delay the opening up of the market. As we've continued to see in this market, not only is it the limited market, but they slow everything down at a snail's pace, even when they're required to, like these 22 licenses, every 100,000 patients, they were supposed to give out 4 within 6 months. But obviously none of that has ever happened. And no one, and one of the judges in the last case, the Del Favaro case that was in front of the court last year, questioned, like, why have none of these, entities sued the department to require them to comply with the time limit set out in the legislation? But I think it's just, pissing off the department and, not wanting to get on their bad side if you are going to file an application. So, I think the twists and turns will continue in the Florida market here.
And I see the Favreau fighting that one forever, because they have been for a long time.
Mike, one final thought on this transition period between adult use and medical is Smart and Safe Florida would allow people essentially to get access through the existing MMTCs for over-the-counter bud without doctor's recommendation. But our licensing structure is directly tied to the number of patients. An adult use system will depress the number of patients because people will not have to then spend money, $300, $150, $250 out of pocket for a doctor's recommendation. So do you see our licensing structure being affected by this adult use system?
So yeah, the medical, that will all, I think, depend on the tax rate, that they end up coming to, because, the benefit of medical would be to then not have to pay taxes on anything that you purchase. But absolutely, I do. We're at like 840,000 people or so now.
Way more potheads in Florida than a million.
Right.
I see they have
honestly, our patient population currently is higher than kind of the national average, right? So in most states that have medical systems, they're around a 1 to 1.5% of the population becomes a medical patient. We're more up at 2.1% of the population are around the medical patients. I looked at this recently. So I think that that's an interesting impact. So, and I think it substantiates the idea that we may plateau, but I don't see us going over 1 million patients here in the state of Florida, honestly, which would then trigger those continued additional 4 licenses. So the other thing I do think that the new constitutional amendment does in modifying the medical marijuana amendment, right? It takes away any requirement and it removes sort of MMTCs. So MMTCs will be grandfathered in the way that I see it. But new entities, which will be retail cannabis operators for adult use, which can be wholesale or vertical, depending on how the legislature creates it, will only be up to the legislature. And I think that there's an argument for the legislature and or any of those MMTCs. The amendment would create a separate system, much like they have in Massachusetts, where now you have all your MMTCs. So these entities will be able to sell to both MMTCs and to adult use people, right? But any new licenses will only be presumption. My position will only be able to sell if they issue any, because there's no requirement in the amendment like there was in, Amendment 2 originally. They'll only be able to sell to those people 21 plus, which is a bigger market. But I do see the potential of that type of difference between the different licenses types as we move from medical to legalization, that there may be a separation from the two markets in the dispensaries. And I don't, again, see, unless the tax is absurdly high, equivalent to the cost of the $75 card and, your doctor and the hassle of doing that, I think a lot of patients will drop off. Absolutely.
Yeah, I can see that. And looking at the ad valorem taxes we see in the various states, including Colorado, California, things of that sort, I wouldn't doubt that it's very possible that the amount of taxes that we have to pay in addition to the price of the product itself may equal, if not be greater than, the cost of getting a medical card right now as we currently stand. And with that, I think we need to get to the news. And we want to thank Mike for coming by and giving us the word. We will continue to collaborate, and we have some great bills that we are going to push this next session if we have to railroad those guys into the ground.
Well, Mike, thanks for joining us, and we look forward to working with you on these issues, brother.
Thank you, guys, and congrats on your spot on the board, man, and normal.
No, we got
it, man. That's awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Hopefully we'll see you in Key West.
Indeed. I'll see you there in December.
Excellent. Awesome, man. Take care, you guys. Have a great one. Thank you.
Yeah, Chris will be the one in the biker uniform.
Carlos, you want to roll that intro for me?
It's time for the news.
Oh, who is that guy in that military cut?
All right, so let's jump right into it. Okay, first and foremost, shout out to the state of Maryland. July 1st, this coming weekend, is going to be when their adult use takes effect. I'm pretty excited for it. Adults will get to grow 2 plants. In addition, it'll be interesting to see this transition, which again is something that we need to watch out for in Florida. I'm interested to see on the ground and experience it personally, how they move from a medical system to an adult use system. Also, the fact that Maryland has also social equity license applicants as part of it too. So seeing how minority small business owners can get into this industry over the next couple of years is going to be an interesting development. But beyond that, I want to talk a little bit about some of the latest news stories. In particular, data coming out of the Journal of Studies on Alcohol and Drugs out of Ottawa, Canada, shows that adults who live near licensed cannabis retailers are more likely to obtain marijuana from legal sources. Meaning, if you have a dispensary in your neighborhood, you're more likely to go to the dispensary rather than to a legacy market dealer. So
that's not just because Canadians are more polite, right?
Also, you have to think about how the distribution of various places in the different cities and such. One of the things I found interesting in Colorado, you could drive through small towns in the desert and they only have a bodega, a post office, but they have a dispensary. So when it comes to essential businesses, you'll see a gas station, you see a post office, you see a dispensary in Colorado. So most of those places, with the exception of Colorado Springs, which has only one adult use dispensary, but tons of medical ones. So you see how also local governments and their moratoriums can have some effects and such on the businesses. Moving past that, data published in the Journal of Psychopharmacology coming out of London, England, shows that cannabis products are safe and effective in treating generalized anxiety disorder. Shocker.
Yeah, that was part of our expansion of qualifying conditions. Absolutely. That and autism has been greatly underrated.
Well, another issue is, of course, in it coming out of Germany, data published in the German medical journal Schmerz, fibromyalgia patients experience symptom improvements and reduce their use of prescription analgesics following oral THC treatment.
And that's all because of Schmerz.
Well, and then lastly, a placebo-controlled clinical trial data published in the New England Journal of Medicine, based off of a study done in Queensland, Australia, showed that THC and CBD combinations reduce the tic frequency in patients with Tourette syndrome. So, all in all, when it comes to the Schedule 1 status of cannabis, saying it has no medical value, that's, again, like I said before, a bold-faced lie in this country. And when it comes to looking at studies, it's like one of the things that I heard at a Drug Policy Alliance conference earlier this week was that we need to have a study group pushed by Congress to examine cannabis and the beneficial. I was like, okay, no, there's enough studies. You can go to PubMed.gov, see tons of studies. It does not have to necessarily be an American FDA approved homegrown study. We've also already shown the FDA has no desire or political will to do any cannabis studies. All right. The FDA itself is a corrupt agency. I recall my professor in my master's program at USF telling me, Chris, you want to make money with a public administration degree? Go work for the FDA. And I was like, why? And he said, because the same companies you regulate are going to pay you off the books millions of dollars to write favorable white papers about their products. So if the FDA can't be trusted because it's an agency bought wholesale by the pharmaceutical industry and by big agriculture, then why the hell would we trust any of their studies when it comes to cannabis, when we can find plenty of medical studies all over the world that show the efficacy of cannabis? We do not need to study this any further. What we need are politicians with what they call cojones in Spanish, balls in English, big testicular fortitude. And the sad part is that in many cases, it's not the men, but it's the women that we're seeing in the legislature, like Eleanor Holmes Norton, like Nancy Mace, on both sides of the aisle, that have the fortitude to stand up and say, this is wrong, this needs to change, and we need to pass legislation that makes this happen. Now, I do have my criticisms of Nancy Mace's bill. In no way, shape, or form do I believe we should be paying taxes on our weed and then turn around and giving that money to the police when we already see overinflated, militarized budgets in police departments. The issue I have with the Democrats' bill is that it's too much on the goddamn taxes. So this is where we are in Congress right now, is that you have these bills that are everybody's jockeying to see who's going to make it happen. And in the meantime, people are still being locked up. And it drives me crazy. So being on the board of National Normal, what I see in the future of our organization, both at the grassroots level and nationally, is that we are going to be a consumer advocacy lobby. We're going to need to continue to hold big multi-state operators accountable for selling booth to patients. We need to make sure that we're advocating for a sustainable industry. One of the biggest issues I see with the adult use and even medical marijuana industry is the amount of single-use plastics that are used and discarded, and it breaks my heart to see the environment happen like this. I mean, I spoke with a company earlier this week who was looking to get into it because they make biodegradable, sustainable doob tubes. And I'm thinking that's a good first step. We need to make sure that at the state level, the legislature puts the pressure on the industry to adopt biodegradable and environmentally safe packaging, because the amount of plastics we're producing is just obscene.
May I recommend a situation where if you go into a dispensary with a doob tube previously purchased and they can refill it and seal it for you, then you get a discount.
Really? There you go, Gary. Reuse, recycle, reduce.
I reuse all my doob tubes as ashtrays, just so you know.
I reuse all of mine to kind of just roll up everything for the week on the weekends. So
but unfortunately mine pile up. I should be
Yeah.
a little bit more cautious about that.
well, that's how I give them away for Christmas presents and
There,
stuff.
there were like dispensaries in California that would like allow you to take your shit back. like when you were done with it.
Well,
That was pretty cool.
we were just putting the bedroom back together this last week, and my wife found my doob tube collection in my sock drawer, and she was overwhelmed by the fact that she couldn't find any socks.
I gotta say, I like having you guys back. I didn't say hardly anything this week.
Well, I appreciate Mo standing in for us. Obviously, she's a lot better looking than I am, but then again, so are you.
Well, Carlos, I appreciate you holding it down while I was in Colorado, and it's definitely been good to get back in the show with y'all. We had a great Cannabis Action Awards. A lot of fun. People had a great time. I even saw the detractors on social media making fun of the trophies because they're shaped like butt plugs. And I said, well, if you don't like them, shove them up your ass.
which is how they were intended, I understand.
I'm just, I'm picturing Dr. Asado walking around the after party with like 4 butt plugs in his hand.
Well, I did give I gave Nikki Freed her 2 awards at the National Normal meeting, and she took a picture just like, hey, with the two awards. So we do have some other awards still pending from folks who weren't able to make it to the show. And so again, if you won a Cannabis Action Award, you can stop by. Carlos, you have them in St. Peter. They're at the Ybor location.
Now,
all right, so stop by Chillum and Ybor. You can pick up again your membership card and pin if you joined as a member, and you can pick up your Cannabis Action Award if you haven't picked it up.
Now we have not given Willie Nelson his award yet, right?
No. As a matter of fact, I'm getting the address so we can mail it to him. So that's
Raylyn, I'm talking to you, girl. This is his granddaughter we're talking about. Your grandfather has an award for us. It looks like a butt plug, but he'll still love it. So get in contact with us. Come on the show. We'll talk for a while. You can even broadcast from the bus.
Indeed. And again, become a member of Suncoast Normal. Gary, Carlos, myself, we definitely don't do this for a paycheck. We do this because it is an issue of justice in this country and our civil rights, and those are things that are worth fighting for. And so we're going to continue to ask folks to become members. It's only $25 a year. I mean, there are a lot of other dues-paying organizations that cost a lot more and you get a lot less from. One of the amazing things that you get is a 25% discount for being a Suncoast Normal member at Chillum, which is amazing now that there's 2 locations to actually check out. So,
yeah.
Now, I should know that I did take all my doob tubes and I put them in the recyclable bin because they do take white plastic. So I'll be interested in seeing how the waste disposal people see my bin when they come by this next week.
That's very conscious of you, Gary.
Absolutely. And I found out that
Dare I say woke.
and also I donated a lot of my swag, and I not that I said I had a lot of True Leaf shirts and Sunshine shirts, but I'm certain that somebody will use them.
Well, I'll say this much. I wish our legislature spent less time being anti-woke and more time worrying about people's civil rights and their pocketbooks, because our economy is in a lot of trouble when it comes to looking at the rising cost of insurance rates in the state of Florida, and when it comes to actually looking at the limited market when it comes to purchasing quality medicine. You should not have a choice between having to go risk your freedom on the legacy market or having to purchase overpriced corporate booth. That should not be a choice that we have in this state. We should have safe access to high quality medicine for anybody who needs it.
And we will be fighting for you in Tallahassee, and we want you to too. So you need to become a member and help us in the fight. We want your treasure, we want your talent, and we want your treasure.
It is time.
Well, yeah,
Time works
we'll
too.
take your time too, and the treasure.
Well, we're going to have our next membership meeting virtually coming up in July. So for all of you who are interested in learning about what we do, or if you have friends who are interested in getting involved, by all means, join us online on Zoom at our next membership meeting at the end of July. Other than that, we're going to have some great events coming up in the fall and winter. And I would say stay tuned. Suncoast Normal is back, and we're stronger than ever.
And we are looking for people to file our bills. So you legislators and all you guys, especially who are terming out next session, this is your time to shine.
That's right. If you want to buck the system and stick it to the man, by all means, please sponsor our employment protection bill.
We're talking to you, Spencer Roach. All right, with that, Peace out, guys.